Greetings, programs. Welcome to episode 16. Why can't conservatives handle trans people? Yeah, this one's going to be tricky, and probably long. I was going to get Diana to help me with this one, as she's one of my favourite YouTubers, and knows more about the subject than I do, but she's just too damn busy. So I'm going it alone. Fingers crossed, I won't screw it up too badly. So, in short, this is a follow-on from episode 6. Why do I like head rushers and conservatives? Conservatives cannot handle trans people because conservatives need clearly defined metaphysical borders between concepts, and trans people blur those borders between concepts like man and woman. Well, that was a short episode. Tune in next week for... what's that? You need me to explain and justify it? Oh, that seems fair. Okay, let's lay some ground. What are trans people exactly? Well, to answer that question, we unfortunately need to dig a little deeper and look at some assumptions. What is sex? And also, what is gender? Yeah, really, we have to go that far back. So, in episode 13, we went over in detail how changing the label on the thing might be handy for changing how we think about a thing, but does not actually change anything about the thing itself. Well, this is more of the same. So what is sex? Well, when one person loves another very much... No, not that. What is sex? Well, though they won't describe it this way, a lot of people seem to think that sex is this magical essence somehow permeates everything you are and makes you a man or a woman, almost magically. Well, no, that's essentialism, some magical essence within a thing. That's not accurate, and that's not how things work. So what is sex? Well, sex is a label that we put on something to describe a person, in this context, who has enough markers that we consider them to be of sex, blah. Markers could be such things as size, or build, or breasts, body hair, or face shape, or genitals, and so on. And the reason that I and other people who also talk about this kind of subject use words that sound complicated like sex traits and so on is for one very simple reason. The language that you use shapes the thoughts you have about. See footnote number 1, language shapes. And to some extent, we all already know those. We all know on some level that if we, for example, label one racial group as evil and another as good, sooner or later, it's going to change how we think about them. It's step 1 on how to dehumanize people. A lot of people will tell you, duh, if you have a penis, you're a man, and if you have a vagina, you're a woman. Stupid. Or XX equals woman, or XY equals man. This is not correct, and it's easy to pull to bits. Something like 1 in 100 people are intersex, born with uncommon mixes of chromosomes like XXX, XXY, X nothing, and so forth. Some have the standard XX or XY, but other aspects of the being don't line up. Maybe they have ambiguous genitals. Maybe they have breasts when they otherwise would not have. Maybe they don't, and they otherwise would. Anyone who thinks that a penis and a vagina represent a clear dichotomy is invited to turn off Safe Search and Google big clit. Really, the only difference between the one and the other is one of proportion. And don't Google that at work, seriously. And as other people have mentioned, you do not typically look into another person's pants before you say, hello sir or madam. So what is it that we really do? Well, what we really do is we go off of other cues. The shape of the face, whether they have a prominent Adam's apple or not, whether they have facial hair, broad hips, visible boobs, etc. And even though any given person may have one or more of those traits out of place, because humans are varied creatures, we can still usually gauge them without demanding a gene test. We recognize a feminine appearing person as a woman, even if they lack a couple of markers we normally assign to womanhood. After all, flat-chested women exist. We do not assume they're not women just because they are low on boobage, do we? And Emily Deschanel has a strong jaw, but no one says that she's not a woman, do they? And plenty of women have narrow hips. Are they all not really women? And plenty of women have Adam's apples, and plenty of men don't. What's with them? This is why sex is not a dichotomy, not male or female. It's a spectrum, specifically a modified bimodal distribution. Most people cluster around 2 poles that we call male and female, but not everybody. And there are people every step of the way between the poles of those traits and beyond. Or as Natalie of ContraPoints explains, now if you know all this and you still want to insist on strict binary sexual categories, then you're trying to force reality to fit your preconceived conceptual scheme, instead of adapting your concept to fit reality. And that is what bad science looks like. And this brings us on to gender. What is it, and how does it differ from sex? Well, similar to sex, gender is a label that people apply, but usually to themselves. Other people also apply that label, and most times they line up. And partly this is a function of biology. Many gender markers, boobs and so on, are rooted in biology, and most times they line up. But with trans people or non-binary people, they don't line up. But what is it? Doesn't answer the question. Well, from Gender in Practice, Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, gender is a socially constructed definition of women and men. It is not the same as sex, biological characteristics of women, and is not the same as just women. Gender is determined by a conception of tasks, functions, and roles attributed to women and men in society in public and private life. So to some extent, it's a function of what you do. See footnote number 2, gender definition. That's right, it's socially constructed. Sure, it's related to biology, rooted in it even, but not utterly bound by it, as demonstrated by the idea that inanimate objects, like ships, can be she, and how toys can be masculine or feminine. People can identify Barbie as female, even though she is just a lump of plastic, completely free of chromosomes. No chromosomes there. And a lot of people seem to think that because something is socially constructed, it is therefore worthless and has no meaning. I will just point you at the social construct of money then. It too is a social construct. $100 note is only a piece of paper or plastic. It only has value because we all agree together that it does. And yet, if you lose one of those little notes with 100 written on it, you are going to be upset. So socially constructed is not the same as worthless. That's gender as seen from the outside. From the inside, it's part of your identity. Most of us don't have to look into our pants to remind ourselves what gender. We just know it. It's part of our identity that we've absorbed since the time we were kids. And even if we were in an accident and lost what was between our legs somehow, we'd still be men or women, as appropriate. Even if we ended up in some kind of impossible sci-fi accident and ended up as a brain in a jar, we'd still be men or women, as appropriate. If you had a gene test tomorrow, and it turns out that you were one of the roughly 1% of people with an intersex condition, and that in your case, it turns out that you had XX male syndrome, or androgen insensitivity, and were a normal-seeming man or woman, respectively, and yet somehow you managed to have the wrong genes, would that fundamentally change who you are? I bet not. I bet you just chalk it up to one of those odd things about biology and continue on as normal, man or woman, as appropriate. Well, that's how it is for a lot of trans people. They know they are this gender, same as you do. They just happen to have a body that doesn't line up the same way yours does with their brain. And you don't base your gender on chromosomes, do you? No, because most of us haven't had a gene test, we don't know dick about our chromosome. And that identity that they have, no less real than yours. After all, you don't know that your genes are typical. They could be XXY, XX male, Y female, for all you know, or even something else entirely. Okay, so that's gender, sort of. What is a trans person then? Well, a transgender person is a person whose gender is other than trans, their biological default. So a person who knows they are a man, despite having a body that lacks a penis, or a woman that knows they are a woman, despite having the aforementioned penis. That's a trans person. And everybody's different. Not everybody wants the surgery, or can afford it. Some are just happy living as a member of the other sex. Some are happy with the changes that hormones bring, and see no need for more. And some go as far as surgery. Which makes sense, because if you woke up with an extra genital set of organs growing on you somewhere, you'd probably want something done about that. And, well, so do they. Not all of them, though. And surgery is a big thing, and some do indeed regret it, as some percentage of humans regret any major life change, such as buying a car, or buying a house, or getting married. But, just like those people, the majority are happy with the change. See footnote number 3 for transition happiness before and after. So that's sex and gender dealt with, and a brief touch on intersex people and trans people. So why is it that, for example, we don't fix trans people's brains if the brain and the body doesn't line up? Well, the answer to that is quite simple. You are the brain. The brain is you, effectively piloting the body around like some kind of meat machine. Chop off a leg, and the leg doesn't run around insisting that it's a real you. The part with the brain does that. Repeat this with all the body parts, and what you end up with, doing the talking, is the brain, so to speak. The body does not want anything. It doesn't care about anything. It simply is. Maybe in the future we can drop you in a tank and grow a brain, the body that would match it. But we don't have that tech. Okay, so I mentioned non-binary a little while ago. What the heck is that? Well, a non-binary person, aka genderqueer, aka gender non-conforming, aka a whole bunch of other words, is to some extent more of the same. A non-binary person may consider themselves trans, or trans-associated, or not, because it's an umbrella term and it's largely about how you identify yourself. So what is a non-binary person? Well, that depends. It's not a hard and fast term, but in general we are talking about a person whose gender identity, how they see themselves, does not fit neatly into the male or female category, irrespective of what body they happen to be born with. They may see themselves as possessing traits of either of the two common genders, or none. Their identity may be drift from more masculine to more feminine based over time, or not. Some may give it no thought at all, and simply identify as me, and reject all labels and expectations. Well, hang on. What's the difference between a non-binary person who was assigned female at birth and, say, a tomboy, for example? Can't we just call these people tomboys? Well, you'd really need to ask them. But generally, a tomboy is a person who still identifies as female, even if she's out doing boyish things or dressing in a boyish way. A non-binary person doing the same things probably does not identify as a female while doing them. See footnote number 4, all about non-binary people. Okay, so that's a whole lot to take in, but what the heck has this got to do with conservative? Well, if you spend any time watching the news, or online, you see objections to trans rights, objections to parents bringing up their kids to accept trans people, or even objections to people bringing up their kids gender neutral and letting them sort it all out when they're old enough, or even going on hormone blockers if they think they're transgender in order to block puberty and make transitioning more complete. You will find that people objecting, the bulk of those people, nearly all of them in fact, are conservatives. Sure, there will be some objections from other groups, but it's conservatives leading the charge. By and by, the same people objecting to anything trans now are the same people who objected to anything gay some years ago, anything women in charge a few years before that, and anything black in the decades before that. What's up with that? Well, several things. First off, in any population, there will be early adopters and late adopters of anything, from cell phones to new social attitudes. And so when new social attitudes do come along, there will always be some people slower on the uptake. No one has to be ahead of every curve. A major part of it is a conservative mindset. As discussed in episode 6, the Big 5 personality scale is the first one that used real science to determine it. It means it works in ways that the other ones never did, and is really different because, and one of the 5 axes on that scale is the openness axis. People who are high in trait openness have a lower response to revulsion. They are less likely to be grossed out by things, and thus will be more open to sample new food, new cultures, new people, new way of life. And often they're also slightly scruffy. But hey. People lower in trait openness are interested in orderliness, tradition, routine, and with nice strong borders between metaphysical concepts like black, white, male, female, and our country, other country. Does any of this sound familiar? Yep, that's right. Conservatives, right-wingers, insert name of party here. So basically, we have a personality model that can predict with good, if not perfect accuracy, how you will vote, and what things will appeal to you to induce you to support various initiatives. Don't take my word for it. Google Big 5 personality test and take the test. I can almost guarantee that if you think that trans people have something wrong in their heads and that they need fixing, they really should not be humoured, I'll bet you'll be low in trait openness, and I can almost guarantee that you're also conservative or conservative. Those who do not fit this pattern and consider themselves to be conservative, but are okay with trans people, often will have had some experience that forced them to reconsider. Like, for example, having a family member or close friend come out as trans. The reverse is also true. If you are totally okay with trans people, and think that people should be allowed to call themselves whatever, and or that we should respect other people's identities, chances are good you're a lefty of some. Of course, no measure is perfect, and humans are complex, so there will be exceptions, maybe even you, but the rule exists nonetheless. People high in trait openness don't vote right. They are not evangelical Christians. They are far more likely to be either non-believers, pagans, or very liberal, God is love type Christians. They are almost universally not the ones throwing hate and bullshit, trans people. People low in trait openness need those clear distinctions between categories. Openness itself is almost by definition the ability to tolerate blurred boundaries and spectrums, rather than psychological need to put things in crisp, clean boxes, which is only a problem because life is messy and rarely fits in boxes, and these people vote right. It's part of the reason there's so much polarization between left and right in politics, because the right sees the left's blurry boundaries and mushy rules as a threat to what they're trying to do, almost to their very worldview, and the left sees the right's tight need for rules and clear distinctions, and thinks that trying to force the world to comply is going to cause problems. And worse, they attribute it to inherent wrongness of the other, or mindset, or even just taste. Those people, they just don't value different things or see the world differently. They're wrong. And on the low end of the openness spectrum, conservatives, people are driven more by fear than those on the other side of the openness spectrum, which is why conservative commentary tends very noticeably to focus on apprehensions of what might happen and fear of the other. See footnote number 5, fear. This is why it is almost universally conservatives that are the ones leading the charge on anything anti-trans, whether it be the military, or bathroom bills, or rights in general. And it's not because they're conservative. It's because they are low in trait openness, and people low in that trait become conservative. It's not bad or wrong, it's just one of the many ways for humans to be. We need the spread. If we were all universally lefty liberal types, sure, we'd be a lot more relaxed, but probably nothing would get done. And if we were all righties, we'd be ordered and organized, but nothing would ever change or improve. Society needs dreamers and bean counters both. Conservatives are not wrong just for being the way they are. They can no more decide to have that brain that they have than a trans person can decide to have a different brain. Change is fear. Another note of resistance is that trans people are new. New things cause uncertainty, and to the fear-dominated conservative mind, this is a potential threat. No, trans people have existed as long as people. There are trans animals, for crying out loud, so it's a fair bet there were trans proto-human ape people before there were any actual people. But what is new is their acceptance and open existence in modern Western society. In other cultures, trans folks have existed in one form or another for millennia, but we have a tendency to ignore them because they are not the US, or Britain, or France, etc. Minority rights face resistance when the new minority starts making noise, but is eventually mostly accepted. When they're new, they're a problem. Lots of folks with a conservative bent have issues with trans people. Less have issues with gay people. Less still have issues with women doing men's jobs, and less still have issues with black people. Because they are less and less new, they are no longer challenging to the status quo. They are now part of the status quo, between the stereotypical conservative and the equally stereotypical liberal. Reaction to change. On the one hand, life is good, and any change runs the risk of making it worse, and that's scary. Any change might make it even better. Change is to be embraced, and this is neatly highlighted in a cool book called Who Moved My Cheese? See footnote number 5 for details. To summarize, that's why conservatives have trouble with trans people. Because they are scary, because they don't fit into neat boxes, and conservatives find the lack of neat boxes to be scary. Because they are new, sort of, and new things represent change, and change can be threatened. And because there is a likelihood that these people are behind the times to a degree, and thus less familiar with what's going on in the world. And because conservatives as a group are more responsive to fear as a motivator. So what does this mean? Well, we need to accept that as much as it sucks, and as much as we might wish it were otherwise, some people are just going to find trans people scary and frightening. And that they can no more change that this is happening to them than a trans person can stop being trans. This doesn't mean giving these people a free pass to discriminate, or to go along with whatever the hell it is they're proposing or doing. But that does mean we need to understand why they are doing what they're doing, so that we can tailor our responses appropriately, to recognize that they are being driven by things they cannot control, and to not react with anger, even if we feel justified in that anger, and so that we can see the next thing coming. Keep in mind, when technology allows for DNA to be changed, for bodies to be furry, stored into robots, or uploaded into the cloud, then we are going to see the same sorts of objections for the same reason. So let's get a head start on the robotophobes, or the furryphobes, or the uploadphobes of the future, eh? That's all for today. Kind of a long one, and in the footnotes below I've included a bunch of links to extra material that I've only brushed on here. Give it a look and you might find it some useful resources that talks about trans people and their experiences and so on. Tuning in next week when I will be explaining how politics gave us big brains and is the oldest profession, predating even humans as humans. Yep, monkeys had politics, and it gave them a big brain. Bye for now.